from my perspective also congratulate BBVA for organizing this seminar. I think it's very timely, it's very important, and I was just saying to José Manuel that I think it also forced me to think about these issues. I personally am leading CEPS, a think tank here in Brussels, and of course for a think tank these issues are important, but I've worked most of my life on financial, regulatory, financial markets issues, and you think AI is not for us until you start thinking about this and until you look around. So if I just think about the policy issues which I see raised by this entire development, I think there is a multitude that I personally, if I were to be sitting in the Commission or in a national ministry or be a minister, I wouldn't know where to start with. It is enormous. I just try to, group them. I see just generic policy issues. I see issues from an international policy issues, and I see specifically European policy issues. If I think about the generic policy issues which it raises, of course, the ethical issues, as we discussed in the previous panels, privacy issues we discussed, social, it raises big social issues which may increase cleavage in societies, depending on your kind of background, your intellectual capabilities, and so on. It may also raise, as I said, international policy issues, competition policy issues. What we see basically today with the GAFAs. And to exploit artificial intelligence, you need to have size, you need to have big teams to look at AI. This is an issue which big companies can do, which the GAFAs can do, but can a new startup really have the capacity to hire AI expertise? As I was saying, these are the generic issues. I see also international issues. Of course, we were discussing as well this in a moment ago in a panel. In an international context, in a relationship between the European Union and the United States, but not only between these two, also with China. And then I mentioned 3 blocks with probably 3 fairly different approaches on that issues. And how we will solve it, I don't know, but I also hear, and I probably will provoke the Commission people or the EU people a bit on that, I hear from my colleagues in CEPS, let's say, that the EU lacks an AI policy. That one of the problems today which we have is that member states are jumping on this because they see this is becoming a very important domain, like countries like France, Germany are setting up their AI task forces. The Commission has done the same, and one of my colleagues is in the AI task force of the Commission, Andrea Renda. But I hear that the EU has a problem to try to coordinate these different groups from the different member states. And then, of course, if I look at the transatlantic issues related to AI, if we have a certain policy and the US has no policy, like, for example, on the simplest thing, GDPR, we know, and apparently GDPR is starting to get traction, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. I think there is much more below AI which requires some policy response, and if we cannot coordinate it at international level, at least between the EU and the US, we will have trade problems related to that right away as well. As I said, AI also raises for me competition policy issues because only the biggest firms can cope with it, I think. We can probably have a discussion about this in a moment. Let's say that whether size matters or whether it's an issue also if the winner takes it all, also in the domain of AI, because you need to put together so much expertise that you only can really exploit AI if you have the necessary size. So with this, I think there are plenty of issues, and I hope, let's say, we can have an interesting panel with these 2 persons now, let's say, and then I will raise questions afterwards, let's say, to the panelists, and then hope, let's say, that you will also have questions from your perspective. But again, it is a vast issue, and we have just, as a think tank, what we will do tomorrow and after tomorrow, launch our policy priorities for the next Commission. This is brand new. You can download the book from our website as well. And of course, AI and digital is a very big theme there. I think the next Commission, the 2 big themes will be, from my perspective, digitalization and the other one, sustainability. And I think also in the domain of AI, sustainability is a very important issue, meaning if we just let it go, it will certainly not remain sustainable. So I pass the floor. Who starts first? Let's say we haven't agreed on that. Let's say, but I look onto my list. Probably Lucilia, you start? Yes, please. Or you can stay there. But it's probably better if you stand up.
Good evening. My name is Lucilla Scioli. I am Director for Artificial Intelligence and Digitizing the Industry at the European Commission in DG Connect, which is the DG responsible for policy in the area of digital, including telecommunications and media. And as it was said in the introduction, the field of artificial intelligence is very wide, and it is not easy for me, as Director of Artificial Intelligence, to obviously cover the whole area of artificial intelligence, and so there are other parts of the European Commission, like my colleague who will speak after me, or some colleagues in DG GROW who also take some responsibilities for some of the part of the work. But let me tell you first, can I just contradict you from the very beginning? I think we do have a policy in the European Union. We have worked really hard because, first of all, in April 2018, we published what is the European approach to artificial intelligence. And there, basically, we have said what we want to have for the future is that we want the European Union to be among the leaders in the development and in the use of artificial intelligence. And we want these developments to be human-centric. So by saying that, we meant three things. First, we want to be among the leaders in technological progress in artificial intelligence, and to do that, we have to increase our investment in research, but also investment in the uptake and the use of artificial intelligence in all the sectors of the economy by all the companies, large and small. Secondly, we have to pay attention to the socio-economic impacts of artificial intelligence, as it was said earlier, impacts on labor markets in particular. And third, we want human-centric developments, meaning that we want that artificial intelligence is ethical by design in the European Union. Now, I will try, I only have 15 minutes, but I will try to tell you a bit more how we go about these three things. Let me start from the investment issue. It was said earlier that in China and the United States, they are investing a lot more than in Europe. They're really like in China 3 times as much as we invest, in the States 4 times as much as we invest. So what we have done is that we have decided that, first of all, we have increased our investment in the research program by 70% on artificial intelligence. Some of this investment is new. Other part of this investment is, let's say, a reallocation or a mainstreaming of artificial intelligence for the period 2018-2020. But then, and we know that if the member states did the same thing, and they also increased their investment in research by 70%, and this creates a certain leverage effect on the industrial players, on the private players, we can achieve an investment of 20 billion euros by the end of 2020. But that's not enough, because 20 billion euros is what the United States invests nowadays. So we want to do more than that, and we think that during the next decade, we all really have to increase our investment and reach 20 billion euros per year. Now, what we are planning to do is to of course, increase the resources that we will make available to artificial intelligence in our multi-annual financial framework. We have the research framework program. We also have a new program called the Digital Europe program, which will go supporting some specific activities also in artificial intelligence. But what is important is that we don't operate alone. I mean, the European Union doesn't have such a huge budget and cannot be responsible for all the investment in artificial intelligence. So we work very closely with the member states. And we have been meeting with member states on a regular basis, almost every month. And with the member states, we have identified areas where they can work together, where they can invest, and where we can create synergies in terms of investment between all the member states. And in December, they have published a document called the Coordinated Plan. And in this document, you will find all the areas that the member states have decided to work together with. And these areas start from the area of research, which is well known for being a very powerful driver in terms of federating investment in the European Union. And we intend to create pan-European networks of research labs, because it was said at the beginning, it's true, the big platforms, they make a lot of AI investment, but in Europe, we are not really starting from zero. I mean, we have very strong research excellence centers. We have a very strong robotics companies, and so we are strong in artificial intelligence applied to robotics. Maybe contrary. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We know probably all in this audience that the EU budget is about 7% research budget of the national budgets.
Yeah.
If I assume that size matters in artificial intelligence. Is this the case? Meaning, is there an argument for coordination or not, or you can do it basically in startups individually?
Well, when it comes to, depends on what kind of research. If you talk like more basic research, startups don't really do that. And we have research labs both at universities or in research centers or in some companies. What we do in Europe with our research framework is that we create networks between partners in different countries. So we create size and we federate investment and we avoid duplication of effort exactly by having calls. When we have a call in the research framework, we have to have companies from more than 3 countries answering to the calls. And for artificial intelligence, we really plan to have calls that call for networks of research excellence centers. So this is how we intend to federate investment in the area of research. Then we don't only support research. We also, because it's not enough, we have research innovation, and as you said earlier, you also have to get fast to the market because we are too slow in Europe to go from the innovation moment to the market. And there we have, with our new program called Digital Europe Program, we intend to support significant testing and experimentation sites. This is where member states and companies can test applications of artificial intelligence. I'll give you an example, autonomous shipping. There are so many applications of artificial intelligence from shipping to manufacturing to all sorts of sectors. So what the European Union can do is to help a member state to invest in the capacity of a certain testing experimentation site, and then also would want that experimentation site is open to the experimentation of companies from other European countries, so that we again avoid the duplication. After that, we will support and we will help the uptake of artificial intelligence by small medium enterprises, because it's not just a question of doing research and developing. Then artificial intelligence has to be applied to something. So a small medium enterprise in any sector will have to start asking itself, which data do I use? Which algorithm do I need? How can I transform my business model with artificial intelligence? And so we will have technology organizations that we call digital innovation hubs that we co-fund with the member states, and we aim at having one of these in every region of the European Union. We would like these hubs to be competent in artificial intelligence and to help the small medium enterprise to reflect about the data needs that they have, about the skills that they need as well, but also about the application of artificial intelligence to their specific case.
Can I ask again a question? Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
Take an example. I mean, I follow financial markets, and the financial markets issue is robot advice, which is based on AI. What you just mentioned, let's say, you try to give this technology to smaller firms. If we compare our firms to US firms, their size, like in the IT business, is 10 times, if not 100 times bigger than one of the European firms. I mean, what I hear about State Street, for example, yes, I put it on, but yeah, no, it works. What I hear about State Street, one of the big fund providers, they invest 250 million a year in these issues. If you compare this to the size of European firms, they don't even have 20 million, the larger firms, to invest in that. So we have an enormous competition problem between the EU and the US, also in that field.
I mean, the larger firms, believe me, we have much bigger firms in robotics than the United States have. I mean, we are strong in robotics, more than the United States are. Not only, we also have a very strong industrial sector who uses the robots. So we can be drivers of this kind of development. I agree with your reasoning if you think of more like business to consumer market and you think of the big platforms. There I agree. I mean, we cannot pretend to compete with the GAFA of this world. But then when it comes to artificial intelligence embedded in robots or in machines, there we do have a role to play in the world. And And we have a very strong industrial sector that can drive these developments by uptaking and developing further the technology because they adapt it to their sector. So, but we do have a lot of small, medium enterprises in Europe. We cannot forget that. It's more than 90% of our enterprises. And what we can do from the European Union is to make an infrastructure available that can help these enterprises. I mentioned the hubs, but I also would like to mention a project which is an outcome of our research project, which just started. It's called the AI on Demand platform. This is a platform that will offer repositories of data, algorithms, and service and help paid by the European Commission to the small, medium enterprises that would like to implement AI in their business. Then, of course, we also have an issue of skills, and this was, I guess, raised by you, so it was probably raised in the previous session as well. We lack talent in Europe. We don't have enough. We don't have enough data scientists, and we don't have enough developers of artificial intelligence. The good ones very often leave to other parts of the world where they are paid better. And this is an issue that we stress a lot, and we work a lot on that with the member states because education and training is very much under the competence of the member states and not so much under the European Union. Another issue that is very important for the member states is data. So we work with the member states to make sure that we have enough public sector data available, published in open data formats, so that also smaller developers of artificial intelligence can have access to data. And this is an intensive work, and we also work with the member states to identify standards for exchanging and reusing data in the business sector. So data have a value. Companies in certain sectors are not so willing to share. They don't have enough incentives, let's put it the way, to share and reuse the data. And therefore, we work with them to identify these incentives and to identify ways in which this data can be shared, protecting their value and satisfying the incentives of the companies. And secondly, the trust issue. We have set up, as I said earlier, we would like the characteristics of investment in Europe is to support technological development which is trustworthy. And so with that objective in mind, and also on the basis of the experience of the General Data Protection Regulation, we have set up a group of high-level experts. They are 52. They are from a very diverse background. From consumers' organizations to businesses of different sectors, philosophy professors, ethical professors, and they are drafting guidelines on trustworthy AI. And these guidelines have been published. The first version was published in December. It was open for comments. We have received more than 500 comments to those, and they will publish a final version in March. This is very important because these guidelines are formed of an ethical framework, which is a little bit not theoretical, but basically summarizes the principles that development of AI should respect on the basis of the fundamental rights in the European Union. But then secondly, on the basis of those principles, it also develops an assessment list, questions that developers should ask themselves when they are developing artificial intelligence. And of course, we would like to, in the future, be able to apply that to test it in different sectors and see if this assessment list is actually useful, if it can be fine-tuned, if it makes sense, and see also this way get closer also to the developments in artificial intelligence in the different sectors of the economy. So I would say stay tuned because the next big step is the publication of the guidelines, and we will discuss and we will communicate about that on the 9th of April. But then the work with the member states continues, and once a year a coordinated plan will be published and updated, and the work with the member states will continue. So we've worked 1 year, but we worked a lot, and this is despite the national strategies, which are consistent with our plans and which we asked all member states to put in place by mid-2019. So now you know the French and the German strategy, but all the member states are working on a strategy. Thank you.
Can I ask you one additional question before I pass the floor to DG Research, because that's probably more in your domain. You said data sharing of AI between enterprises, but we know we have some articles in the treaty which forbid certain sharing of data, or unless there is a kind of a clearance given by DG Comp. So don't we have competition policy issues also there?
Well, so far we have not had them, okay? So far there has not been any case about, companies that, for example, were not sharing data with the fear of competition policy, or as far as I know, European companies that they had a similar problem. But we incentivize the sharing of data if this gives rise to the application of artificial intelligence and the development of innovation and of new of progress also for the companies. Sharing of data does not only mean collusion. Sharing of data also means possibility to progress. And companies don't share all their data. They just share what they need with certain objectives. So for the moment, I don't think that the competition policy is important, but it is not, the principles that we formulate for sharing the data, and by the way, they have been published in December in the data package, do not go against the competition policy issues.
Okay, thank you, Lucilia. That was very clear and very good overview. And we also have DG Research here. Jean, let's say, pleasure to have you here. So probably you can contradict what I said in the beginning as well.
Thanks a lot, and good evening now, ladies and gentlemen. You are looking for contradiction, no? So, no joke apart. First of all, I will slightly adjust what I was expecting to say, because a lot was already said by my colleague from DG Connect, but it's fully understandable because DG Connect is the leading DG on this issue. And as far as research and innovation DG is concerned, we are, of course, working hand in hand with DG Connect, but we have our own specificities, of course. Allow me first to start by talking about the issues that we discussed in the previous panel, and focusing on the title of this conference. Anything which is relating, in fact, to the ethical issue, and anything which is relating, in fact, to the dignity of the persons, of human beings, the privacy, the integrity, is at the heart, in fact, of what we are doing in any case within the research and innovation EU policy. If you read carefully the current framework program for research and innovation, Horizon 2020, or the next framework program for research and innovation at EU level, Horizon Europe, it's one of the first dimension, one of the first recital, as we say, that you will find. So these issues that you are tackling in the context of neurotech and artificial intelligence is at the heart of our policy. This requires, therefore, in any case, that in addition to the support that we are providing to research and innovation, and I will come back to this in a minute to complement what Lucilla said, we have also to make a number of additional work in order to ensure that we have an approach which is as consistent as possible. The first thing I would like to say is that it was mentioned earlier, I think by you, sir, the reference to the GDPR. It's obvious that we have to use it also in this context. But we should not forget something that was recalled by one of the MEPs that was present to the second panel, which is the use of some articles that already exist in the context of the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights. We have also there a number of laws that exist, and we were called before on the need or not to have additional regulation. Allow me, first of all, to say that we should at least implement the regulation we have. Because this is certainly something that we are not doing really today. Maybe for cultural question, it was discussed in the previous panel also, but also sometimes for a question of political willingness. And this is something which is of key importance. The second thing is that in this context of regulation, I mean, Lucilla recalled that, of course, you have what exists already at national levels that must be taken into account. But we have also to look at the existing rules and to see if they are fitting for purpose due to the evolution of the technology, and how we could be as agile as possible in order to take into account the evolution of the technology and subsequently the evolution of the market. Taking also into account the fact that we are in a global world and that in any case the situation in the States is totally different than the one that you have in China and that you have also among the member states in the Union. In this context, a part of the work which is also carried out within the Commission is a review of the existing regulation. I mean, this is not something that is very visible, but the work which is carried out, for example, in the context of the medical device regulation, the work which is carried out in the context of the in vitro diagnostic medical device regulation, that are of course very focused, but they are totally, in fact, in the same order of ideas. And this kind of work is implemented within the Commission, and where we will make some recommendations, some proposal, hopefully endorsed ultimately by the Council and or the Parliament. So this kind of work is part of this global issue. And this was launched, in fact, and announced. Maybe it was not enough visible, but at the same moment we had the communication on AI, I mean, you had also an accompanying document, a staff working document of the Commission, that was also coordinated by a colleague of DG Connect, that mentions this. And it was not only covering AI, but it was also covering other issues like Neurotech. I would like to come back on the point that was made also on the investments. A lot was said already by Lucilla regarding what is currently proposed in the context of Horizon 2020, where indeed we will increase the budget. I recognize that it's only a small budget in comparison to the all efforts that are implemented at EU level, but I'm sure that you will recognize that the EU budget is acting as a kind of catalyst for what is implemented also at EU level in the member states. And the type of activities that we are supporting currently under Horizon 2020 has also the purpose, indeed, to have a leverage effect on what is implemented with public money, but also with private money. The partnerships that we are trying to stimulate between the national programs on these kind of issues. I'm just remembering what we did already now, started in 2008, on the coordination of the national programs dedicated to neurons, to neurotics in the member states, covering 14 member states as well as Canada, Turkey, Israel and others, where they have decided to have a common approach on what should be done in this area, and covering also some social and ethical issue, was also part of the discussion we have today. Now, what we would like to do in the future is something more ambitious. I mean, Lucia mentioned rightly the Digital Europe program. But I would like to mention two other parts of the MFF proposals that are of key importance in this context. First, covering the upstream but also the downstream dimension of what we are calling disruptive technology or disruptive innovation, and covering therefore AI by definition. We will have within the Framework Programme for Research and Innovation a new initiative called the European Innovation Council. The purpose of the European Innovation Council is to do two things, to make it a long story short. On one hand, on the upstream dimension, to stimulate the emergence of breakthrough science, and AI is typically one, that could deliver on some societal needs, but with the purpose indeed to take more risk. I mean, to maybe go beyond the border, not only of the knowledge, but of the current constraints that we may have. And there's a balance between the technology or the knowledge generation and what could be accepted by the society will have also to be assessed. And the purpose of the EIC on this dimension will be covered under a program which is called the Pathfinder, which will build, in fact, on what we have already developed in the context of the Future Emerging Technology Program, be it bottom-up or top-down. On the downstream part, one of the issues that Lucia also underlined, but you mentioned it also, is the issue of the capacity for our startup to scale up, and in particular in deep tech. We have a real competition with the US, but now also with China and more also with India. Not because we are not able to set up startups. I mean, we have generated in Europe last year more startups than in the US. The key issue is not the capacity to generate startups, it's to accompany them in their growth. And covering therefore three main obstacles: the access to finance, and especially when you are working in areas where you will not have necessarily a return on a short-term basis. And this is the purpose of the EIC. I mean, what we would like to do is to take risk on projects and entities that are non-bankable. The second issue will be some legal constraints that may exist for the growth of the company, and there we are back to the question of the balance between the technology, which is, as it was said in a previous panel, not good or bad, but on the other end, the wish and the willingness of the society. And the third issue, mentioned also by Lucia, is the skills. Because, I mean, we may have excellent ideas, but maybe you have not necessarily all the skills. Sorry, I mean, I'm working in the research area, but a researcher is not an entrepreneur. It's two different work. And you are working in Google, I mean, you know that it's two different things. So in there, we have a lot of weakness in Europe. So the purpose of the EIC will be, with the accelerator part, to try to tackle this part. And of course, we will do it with the private sector, but we have to be very clear. The private sector, sir, is not coming in this kind of area, also because we have not funds that have the sufficient size to provide support to this kind of risky business, because their size is more or less 3 times or 4 times less than a VC fund or a family office fund in the US. And because we have not also the legal framework that allows them to take enough risk at a certain extent. So it was the first thing. The second thing that I would like to add to the European Innovation Council, that by the way, we will test already this year in advance, because the Council, the member states in our comitology program gave their agreement on Monday to do it, so we will launch it in this summer. The other thing I would like to insist on the investments, I will not repeat what Lucilla said on the commitments that we made, but on the future, an important tool that will also act as a kind of catalytic tool in order to stimulate the investment will be the follow-up of the Juncker Plan, the InvestEU program. And there, I mean, not only were we able to generate something like 500 billion euro in the context of the Juncker Plan. I mean, we are very close to this figure now. But in the future, we would like to do even more, and in particular to target some specific areas. And within the specific areas, I mean, I have the chance to co-chair one of the windows that will be in the InvestEU, dedicated to research and innovation. We will focus in particular to the ones that are the most promising, and AI will be obviously one of it. So this kind of points are also of, I think, key importance for our debate tonight. Allow me to conclude maybe, in order to allow time for discussion, to add other things that we are doing in the context of the framework program today and that we intend to continue in the future. We have introduced within the EU research and innovation policy 3 important dimensions. First, the responsible research and innovation approach. So on anything that we are doing, including in the project that we are supporting, I mean the notion of responsibility and therefore the link with what can be accepted by the society, what can be endorsed also by the society, is always taken into account. The second thing that we have introduced, and on which I have to say we should do even more, is to associate, in fact, the social sciences and humanities to everything that we are doing on high-tech, on hard tech, in order to prepare also the transition to the society. Because it's obvious that today, when you are talking about AI, I mean, I was looking at a poll in my home country 2 weeks ago. I mean, the huge majority of the people in the society are afraid. I mean, on one hand, they are dreaming about it because, I mean, it looks like a science fiction movie. On the other hand, when they look at what it can mean for them on a daily basis, not only on the issue that we are talking today, but on the impact on their job, I mean, they are afraid. And it's also because they are not aware of what could be the positive side and how we will mitigate and hopefully avoid the negative side. There, it's very important to involve also the social sciences and humanities research constituencies. And we are not doing it enough today. So we have to do it. And the last thing is, and I'm closing the circle with the first part of my talk regarding regulation, is that we have introduced, and we have tested now for 2 years, the possibility not only to take into account the precautionary principle when we are elaborating regulation, but also the innovation principle. Not saying that it should be on the same level, but if each time that you are developing a new regulation, the precautionary principle is hampering the possibility to have some innovation advancing, despite the fact that you could demonstrate that indeed it could not be dangerous for the well-being of humankind, it's problematic. And this idea of innovation principles that we have introduced 2 years ago, we are testing it. We have tested it in a number of regulations, for example, on some regulation dedicated to plastics. And it makes sense, because therefore we could nevertheless provide the possibility of a more agile regulation. And this is something absolutely key in this debate, the agility of our regulation, because the difficulty of a regulation, you know how long it may take to take a decision on a regulation. So if the regulation is there and suddenly you have an evolution on the market and you have to change the regulation, it will take you 1 year or 1 year and a half, it could be really problematic. So we should do much more on this, and we intend, at least on the side of the Commission, to convince Member States to do more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. If I can ask you one follow-up question right away. I mean, what is the budget of some member states, take Germany and France, on AI as compared to what is in the MFF? Have you got an idea?
France,
you can take the microphone, Lucilia.
France is 350 million for, I don't remember if it's 4 or 5 years.
Which is very limited. If I mention the sum of...
But wait a moment, Germany is like 3 billion euros for 5 years, yeah.
But then for robots.
And France is a lot compared to many other European countries.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 very interesting presentations. We had DG Connect on the one hand, DG Research on the other, basically 2 key DGs in Brussels, let's say, dealing with these matters. We're open for your questions. I think certainly there are many more policy issues. I was going to ask you a question, Rafa, as you see it from the United States. The comments which I've made, let's say, would be very interesting to get your insights as you, as a European, have worked 30 years in the United States.
Yeah, so sometimes it feels impenetrable to look at it from the outside. I mean, I am European and I feel European. I don't think identities are exclusive. I've worked in the US now 30 years, so I also feel American. But one question I had for Lucila is that, I mean, a lot of what you said sounds wonderful. And I was interested in these guidelines that you said are coming up, that 500 people have contributed to them. How are they going to be implemented? What is, you are supposed to be, you two represent the executive arm of Europe. So what are the forces that you have to ensure that these ideas are actually followed?
First, let me tell you that we are in a moment in which we cannot make new proposal, as you probably know, because there is the end of the legislature, so the new commission will come in place at the end of the year, and therefore the proposal on how the guidelines will be used in the future will actually come with a new commission. But what we can do in the meanwhile, I mean, it's true, more than 500 people commented, and actually even more because we have a platform online. It's called the EU Alliance Platform, where people discuss a lot about AI, and there's more than 2,000 people there, and they have been commenting and giving input to the group. But still, it's a group of 52 people, and still we need to have a lot of use cases before we do anything, we even think of regulating anything. So we will be devoting time to testing or piloting these guidelines in different sectors and see how difficult they are, and also speaking to stakeholders in the member states, because you cannot do these things with 52 people from Brussels. I mean, you also have to go to the member states and speak to, I don't know, consumer organizations in the member states, relevant stakeholders everywhere, and that will take time to do. So I think until we have a new commission, we will be spending time in getting even more input from the stakeholders from all over Europe. And then, which instruments do we have? We have a whole palette of instruments. You know, we can do nothing, because the technology is not mature yet, and so we want to innovate as well. We can use self-regulation, co-regulation. If it doesn't work, then it's a regulation. But do we really need it at the moment? It's not 100% clear. And as I said, we need to do more testing. The technology is quite recent, so we need to know more than what we know now before we make this decision.
So just to finish up on this topic. So, well, first of all, let me, in contrast, in the US, the people that are equivalent to you, first of all, they probably don't exist, and if they exist, they're not doing anything about it. So, when you compare the government response of Europe versus the US, right now, there is no government response in the US. So in that sense, you are leading. But my worry is that this process seems very slow and very complicated. And this is a case where we may need to be anticipatory. You know, we particularly, since there is a player in the stakeholder, which is the private industry, that are developing these tools, and Neurotech is exploding in Silicon Valley. There are probably dozens of companies now building all these devices already, with, last time I checked, $500 million of investment. So by the time you come up with it and you pilot your guidelines, it may be 5 years too late. No? So that would be my worry, that this process, maybe there should be a faster way of doing things, or a little bit more agile. No?
Well, I think you touched on a very important point, which is how slow the policy making is, and that it just doesn't keep up to date with the digital world. And that is a problem we have in the European Commission, and that they have in all the member states, and I don't have an answer to that. Then, for what concerns the United States, there was an executive order of the president a few days ago, which refers a lot to the activities that take place under defense in the United States, but still which looks and talks about ethics. And, you know, when you see the story of the GDPR, which we started, and then there was the Facebook incident, and after that, I think that in the United States, Facebook itself went to ask to apply the GDPR. Then you realize that even in the United States, maybe not the government itself sometimes, but the companies, for example, are very much after these activities. And we do have American companies in our expert group. And what is happening in the States is that this, let's say, ethical approach starts kind of being implemented at the level of company. But then the result of that is that you probably get a lot of fragmentation and a lot of differences and difficulties in maybe tracing and making the companies accountable, so you need to do a little bit more than that. But I see, you know, this process is starting also in the United States, even if not from the government exactly, but maybe more from the companies. While, for example, in China, I don't see them talking about this for the moment.
Yeah, but in China, they cannot talk about this, that everybody knows. Very simple. There are other questions.
Well, I was going to ask precisely about that elephant in the room, which is China, because we're pretending it does not exist. And I understand your comment, they cannot talk about that, but we should be looking at that. So that's exactly my question. What are you doing about China? I mean, because we had this genetics breakthrough, for example, and everybody suddenly was scandalized that they could just make a kid out of it, and that had been on papers as a possibility. I'm not a biologist, I'm a lawyer, former member of parliament, just for disclosure. And suddenly the whole world was scandalized. And everything we were learning up to now, and we were listening to this morning, this morning, in the previous session this afternoon, a lot of that is going on in China. I don't know how much. I don't know with what kind of experiments that appear as having been banned are taking place. So is somebody in the Commission officially monitoring that? Not banning. I'm not saying banning. Of course, we're not banning. Who is monitoring? Who's following what's up there? Because whenever there's a breakthrough, it will affect us, because it will be completely impossible to say, no, this is China, we pretend it does not exist. This is not like stopping a car on the border. This is not like stopping chemicals, you know. We are used in Europe to say, oh, if we don't like these chemicals, we don't allow them to get through. If we don't allow this consumer product, we ban them from China. But any breakthrough in artificial intelligence from China, we will not stop it. And it will be here before we can stop it. So who is monitoring that?
I would say this is a defense issue. This is part of cyber security, which is a responsibility of the member states until today. It's not a responsibility of the EU.
No. I'm not talking about them against us. I have nothing to do. That has nothing to do with my question. I'm talking what they are doing on artificial intelligence there. And whatever breakthrough they have there will be something that will be impossible not to have it implemented here, whether we like it or not. I'm not talking about, if that was what was understood, it's wrong. I'm not talking about attacks from China. That's another issue.
Purely an industrial policy issue, and then it's for
industrial policy, facial recognition, manipulation, what they was said before of the Neurotech and AI, everything that is going on in China, any breakthrough there, is it being monitored seriously or not?
Well, at the moment, of course, it's always very difficult to monitor what's going on in China. What I can tell you on the basis of the guidelines that are being developed is that there is a lot of emphasis on traceability, and so on the requirement that companies are able to show which data they used, which technique they used, and certain characteristics of the steps that they take. And that are accountable for that. So I think that if, for example, traceability requirement became common in our market, then I think also the Chinese would have to comply to that. But it's not something, of course, that we are applying today. And we have, on things like facial recognition, of course we have views, but I don't think we should be criticizing the technology itself of facial recognition, but we should be looking at the use that is made of facial recognition. So we don't ban the technology on facial recognition, but we don't want to have the social rating system that is being used in China.
No, I mean, just to complement on this, I mean, you're right, huh? But I mean, the issue is a bit difficult. Also, when you look at the research or innovation dimension per se, on one hand, it started to be, I would not say irrelevant, but difficult to explain why we should not cooperate with the scientists that you may have in China today. I mean, in some of their university, you have some of the top scientists in the world. On the other hand, you have a number of issues regarding the treatment of intellectual property rights, the reciprocity that normally you should have and that they should, in the context of the programs that we are financing or co-financing, they should respect also our rules. And on this, I mean, let's be honest, it's not 100% clear, to be diplomatic. So, and it's an issue. And it's an issue in particular in this area, but also in other areas. So we are aware. We are trying to see how we could tackle this. I mean, the principles regarding the respect of a number of principles are enshrined in our various legal bases. Now, the issue is how to ensure that indeed they are implemented, and this is not only an issue at EU level, but also an issue that should be followed up and stressed by the member states themselves in their cooperation, in their bilateral cooperation with China, which is another issue when you are dealing with EU policy. I just would like to come back on another point that was raised earlier, on another challenge we are facing. I mean, if you look today of the budget dedicated to some of the GAFA, to research and innovation on a yearly basis, it's almost the budget that we will dedicate for Horizon Europe in 7 years. If you look at what Amazon will dedicate, it's bigger. I mean, this year, it's bigger than the valuation of some automotive companies that we have in Europe. So, in other words, it's theoretical. But when you were talking about automotive, I mean the car without driver, theoretically. Tomorrow, some of the GAFAM, I mean, they have the capacity to buy, in fact, some of our car companies like this. So it's an issue. It's not only an issue in terms of research and innovation and technology and whatever, it's an issue also of sovereignty at a certain extent in certain areas. So you were mentioning cybersecurity, I don't know who, but this is typically an issue. Just for you to be aware that, of course, we are aware of the challenge and that we are trying to find solutions. In the context, for example, in particular of cybersecurity, and making a link with what I just told you regarding the support to the growth of company, I mean, we are reflecting on the idea in the context of InvestEU of having a fund, a kind of sovereignty fund in Europe that could intervene for companies that are of key importance, strategically speaking, for Europe. So, and it makes sense, of course, in the cybersecurity areas and for land security issues. It's not only a defense issue, it's much more than this. So, just to tell you and to complement what Lucia said, I mean, we are trying to monitor, we are trying also to find solutions, but it will only take place if we have also a coordinated willingness, not only on what we are doing at EU level, but what is done at national level. Because it must be a global policy on this. And so it's not only the question of what could be proposed by the Commission, it must be replicated or it must be harmonized with what is done also at national level in bilateral agreements.
Okay, we have time probably for 2 more questions. I would try to take them together, or 4. I mean, yes. I mean, we start here and then Javier.
Mine should be quick. This is John Donahue. I spoke earlier. This is somewhat even not in my area of expertise, but at least as a scientist observing and very much interested in AI, I think this is a special situation in that AI is moving extremely quickly, and maybe you can comment on that. But I think it's moving much faster than any of the sort of the public, the governments realize that it is. It's embedded in everything. And we can deal with things that move quickly, but in this case, it's also going to be extraordinarily disruptive, potentially extraordinarily disruptive. And it may require some kind of really innovative process to begin to watch and anticipate what is going to happen and have ideas in place to be able to deal with this. I think the Facebook disruption, and you know, in several of third world countries, there's been real tragedies about how Facebook has been used to identify people and then target them. So I think that if we don't think of something in this unusual case, that we may really be left in the dust. And I think all the countries face this.
Okay, thank you. Javier, and then, yes.
This is the final.
Well, my question now is on the, probably it's in the same length wave. Seems that it's not probably convenient to have a regulation, but just to have some principles to further foster innovation, and at the same time trying to set up a path where we can experiment, innovate, and address investments with a sort of certain security environment, not going to the, wrong outcomes, but fulfilling the spirit and the values of human rights on what is good for the mankind and not the contrary. So someone has to regulate the traffic in some extent, not to make an open space for everyone. And I think that what would be the vision of Europe in conducting that?
I have 2 further comments next to you and then over there, and then we go back to the panel.
So my question actually builds on both things you've just been talking about in terms of regulatory innovation and also what you've talked about in GAFA. And I'm going to bring this back to Neurotech specifically. And one of the things we're seeing in our report that's coming out about this is that, and predictably, GAFA are the ones who are essentially driving innovation in Neurotech. They're doing lots of things behind closed doors, kind of on their own, essentially. So if you are going to take an anticipatory approach to regulating these things, if you were to do that, then you'd be able to have an impact on how they are innovating. So by not being agile, you're not allowing yourself to have an impact on where the field goes.
And then the lady over there. Yeah.
I'm going to add to that question, sorry. I met with Megan Smith when I was at Sundance Film Festival, and she used to work with Obama on AI, and she basically says, you know what, regulation is impossible. I'm not saying I agree with her, but she says regulation is impossible. We have to train everyone to code in coding AI and knowing what AI is, and democratize AI so it's something understandable to everyone so that they can decide how AI is driven. Now, I think that might be somewhat dystopian, but it's something that people say, and she's an expert in AI. My question that connects to that is, well, then if everybody's in charge of their AI, then how they use it will either be right, wrong, manipulative, abusive, positive, because we cannot decide how humans decide to use their abilities, right? So then regulation can come in on transparency, accountability, criminality. And I think a lot of people say, okay, AI is this technology that advances so quickly, but there are areas that we can apply the human criminal realm to a digital realm. Our activities, hate speech, some of the things that the EU has been involved in has been quite impressive. And I think regulation there would be interesting to know how far we can go on those other things. Okay. Sorry to add to that.
So all 4 questions basically related to the challenge of AI, and which is enormous for you. So probably Lucilia and then Jean, and then we close it off here.
I mean, you all talk about regulation, if we have to have regulation, because this is so awful what is going to come, that it's going to But I think, you know, you also all say, oh, we are so slow, and by the time we decide what to do, it's too late. But I don't think so. I mean, first of all, we are more advanced at the moment than most of the other countries in the world in terms of thinking about this. And if we can get the model right, then we will also be able to export it most probably. And that's why we also intend to be a driving force at the global level. Of course, we have to go through G20 or G7 and these kind of organizations, but we can certainly be, like we did for the data protection regulation, be a driving force. Again, I cannot tell you now, but I don't know. It's not because there is not a new commission, but if somebody told me to advise my commissioner tomorrow whether we should regulate AI, I can tell you that I'm not able to tell them. Not yet. I think we have to know a lot more than what we know now. And I'm not the only one thinking this, but we're setting things in motion. For example, all the member states have agreed that they want to apply sandboxes to AI. That means in certain defined environments, they're willing to lift the regulation or existing regulation or the legislative environment for a certain period of time to test certain things. And then we will see whether existing regulations or existing legislations need to be amended to take into account the impacts of artificial intelligence. So when we talk about regulation and artificial intelligence, it's not just a horizontal thing that is going to take place in an area where there is no legislation. There are legislations and regulations in different sectors of the economy. And before we apply our ideas for artificial intelligence, we have to take into account the existing legislation, the sector in which artificial intelligence is being applied, and we have to do some testing. It's not something we can do overnight. So we may be slow, but we are more advanced than many others are.
But I don't think your answer will satisfy many people in the audience. I think we were just calling for a much quicker reaction. Jean, you have the last word, and then we'll have to stop it.
Yes, no, so I fully share what Lucilla said. You will not be surprised. Just to come on one point that was not covered on the GAFA. I fully agree with you regarding what they are trying to do globally. I mean, not entering into the strategy of each of them, but globally to drive the innovation in a number of areas. But it's even worse in reality. Look, for example, of what happened in the context, again, I'm coming back with the same example of the self-driving car. You know that Google had an agreement, for example, with the French car manufacturer, which was PSA. So one of the biggest in Europe. And I'm sure that you know also that a few months ago, the CEO of PSA decided to cancel the agreement. Why? Because what was at stake was the fact that in reality, the technology developed by Google, including AI, by the way, was therefore at the heart of the car. So the manufacturer, in fact, around was nothing in terms of value at short term. So it's not only, I mean, you know, and this kind of issue, we should think about it. It's not only a question of regulation there. It's a question of what we intend to do. Now, it's true that in this particular area, I mean, let's be honest, it's true that in robotics we are well advanced, but in this particular area, in this particular technology, I mean, we are lagging behind the US. And it may totally transform some areas of our industry. So I'm not saying that we should regulate, that we should protect ourselves, not at all. We should find other ways in order to be able to compete with them. So not creating tomorrow morning some GAFAM in Europe, I mean, it will not come like this. But to create the condition in order to have maybe some companies that can emerge on certain niches where indeed we could continue to develop our own industry. So this is what is also at stake, and in particular in AI.
Okay, and with this, I would like to thank you for your participation. At 7 o'clock, we have gone 3 hours through this, discussing this. I think it, for me, only convinces me there is still a lot of work to be done, and we have to be, I would say, extremely attentive for all the developments, and I would certainly ask the different, thank the different people who have asked questions and raised points about this, let's say, for their participation, and thanks also to BBVA for having organized this with a very interesting group of persons. Thank you very much.